This is Anna Troxel from Lovelorn and Mugger, and you're listening to The New Scene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we're back with another brand new episode. And I am not here alone. I've got a special guest co-host with me today, Jason Zeimet of Unoriginal Vinyl. Jason, say hello.
That's me. It's Jason Zeimet from Unoriginal Vinyl out of Denver, Colorado, and Switzerland.
Jason, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here. You know, you are the perfect co-host for this because you run Unoriginal Vinyl and you do vinyl releases for Tooth and Nail Records. And our interview subject on today's show is Toby Morrel of Emery. And strap in because this is a great conversation. We cover it all. We cover the history of the band. We cover their latest record, rub some dirt on it, everything. It's all coming up. And you know Emery. You've put out releases for them on vinyl.
Yeah, I've worked with Toby. I've worked with Matt Carter. I've done a lot of things with the Labeled podcast, which Matt Carter of the Emery fame runs and narrates. And yeah, we did the Last Question Live vinyl packaging for Emery, as well as the Rub Some Dirt on It vinyl packaging for them as well. And love Emery. Love that band's history, trajectory, their fierce independence, and specifically Toby Morrel is an unstoppable badass of a person.
That's awesome. So you do work with Labeled, the podcast, as well?
I've been on multiple episodes and do a little bit of consulting with some of the narrative. They're great. So somewhat of a historian like Matt Carter, and certainly have a lot of interesting, hot, juicy goss on Emery the band that he's going to reveal to you on this episode. It's going to be fantastic.
Yes. It's a great conversation, and that's coming up shortly, so strap in. But first, listen, I need to ask for your support. Support The New Scene. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at New Scene Pod. You can also follow me on Twitch at The New Scene. My stream schedule is pretty erratic because I've always got a lot going on, but follow me and turn on notifications. You'll see when I go live, and you can come join in on the fun. I've also got a gaming YouTube channel and gaming Instagram under the name New Scene Gaming. So go check it out if you're interested. Also support Iodine Recordings. Now Iodine is representing at Fest this year. If you're going to Fest, check it out. We've got Audio Karate, One Line Drawing, Drowning Man, The Darling Fire, The Iron Roses, Joe McMahon of Smoker Fire, Her Head's on Fire, Hey Thanks, and Best X, all playing the Fest this year. It's going to be unbelievable. Check it out. So, Jason, before we jump into ourselves more, let's talk about some music recommendations. What are you listening to lately, Jason? Lay it on me.
Well, I'm really loving that 1975 single, I'm in Love with You. It's a music video that harkens vaudeville and silent film era. I'm a big silent film, especially comedy buff as far as film history is concerned. And the way that the 1975 singer harkens a lot of the body language back to Buster Keaton and Charlie Chase, especially, not so much Chaplin, but a lot of that pantomime style of acting in the I'm in Love with You video. It also has Phoebe Bridgers in the music video. Really did my heart some good. I'm a big fan of that 80s cheese pop, the stuff like Small Pools, if you're familiar with Small Pools as well. Some of these bands that are really nailing the nail on the head with this 80s pop renaissance kind of vibe. It's hitting me right in that music diabetes coma I'm looking to get every time I hear some of that sugary music. And then maybe to contrast that, I just got back from Furnace Fest. So there were some bands and styles of music that I was particularly relieved to see again, maybe for the first time in a long time. Things like Roadside Monument and some of the heavier bands. Life in Your Way is a big one for me to be able to see live and see their vinyl finally come out is a project that I worked on for quite some time. To see all that come to fruition was pretty special to me. So maybe put a little bit of contrast from that sugar pop 1975 stuff with the heavy hardcore. I'm also really into clowncore recently, if you're familiar at all.
What is clowncore?
So it seems to be this YouTube only sensation of two virtuosos. They appear to be jazz musicians who want to play some obscure acid jazz, metal infused style of music. And it's fantastic. They're all wearing clown masks and they're typically driving around in a giant conversion van, playing all this music very live. It's fantastic.
That sounds awesome. I'm going to check that out. So you were at Furnace Fest as well. I was there too.
Did we see each other? Did we meet?
No.
Oh, okay. I was running around selling 3 new first time on vinyl releases, but it was a scavenger hunt. You had to find me to get them.
Oh, you know what? I think I heard about you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because someone was looking for something, and I remember Casey saying he's walking around. You have to find him. And I was like, I wonder what that's all about. It was you.
That's me. You got it. Yeah, we had fun, especially on Saturday. We released Life in Your Way's Waking Giants, which Life in Your Way had not had a vinyl release apart from an independent release in 2011. So it was really fun to get to release their record and introduce them from the stage with Chad Johnson, the Furnace Fest creator. I had a great time, and I told people in the audience, if you would like to buy this record for the next 45 minutes, you're going to have to meet me in the pit. And then I stage dove right when they started. And that was, in fact, how you bought the record, was meeting me right in the center of the pit.
That's awesome. So, I mean, does it make things more difficult when someone has to find you? Do you ever get a table and have the whole setup there at Furnace Fest like a lot of the other labels do?
Nope. We're into the future, my friend.
You're on like a whole different wavelength then.
That's true. Yeah, I'd say that would be fair. Yeah, the idea would be that we give you a QR code. You can scan it on your phone, fill in your information using your own cell phone device, and have it mailed back to you when the records are all finished. So it's not just a function of supply chain issues on vinyl timing, but then it's also a question of convenience for you. You don't have to wait in line. Our interaction together lasts all of about 35 seconds when I hand you that records OB strip with a QR code to purchase, and then it mails back to your house when the records are all done, and you didn't have to worry about whether or not that record got all dinged up in your backpack during the rest of Furnace Fest.
You know what? That's a great idea, actually. One, because it's futuristic and quick. And I live in New York City. If I see a line, I'm not waiting. I'm just not. I'm always on go, go, go. And I was very cognizant of, I was working in the Iodine recordings booth a little bit, and we would hold records for people.
Sure.
If they bought a tote, buy a tote, we'll hold the records for you so they don't get messed up. And I was very, very careful about handling the records and placing them down and picking them up, because I know that collectors are very particular about the quality and condition of the records.
That's absolutely correct. And we didn't want them to have to go put them in a hot baking car and melt the records or anything like that. We just thought about the end user's experience being optimal by not waiting in line, number one, and number two, not having to carry around heavy objects with them, not just at the festival, but on the plane home. Let that be part of another brick and mortar sort of traditional model, but we're trying to think about also not shipping all of the records that didn't sell home. That's another cost that goes into the process. So, hey, but let's talk about Emery for a second, because Emery's amazing and their story is fantastic to me. Just basically coming from this corner of the United States where music is inside of a little bubble that oftentimes did not make it all the way over to the West Coast. They're a Carolina band. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So the idea that 4 or 5 of them decided, we just want to make it so badly, we're willing to gas up our van and drive not only across the country, but it's almost the farthest drive you could make in the country from Carolina to Seattle, and just wait outside the door of your favorite record label. And this is happening in like 2001 or 2002. That's a pretty ambitious idea to follow.
Yeah, that was a big move. That was a big move. It was just incomprehensible to me to just pick up and move across the country like that. And listen, you're going to hear about that and more right now. Make sure you check back in with me and Jason in segment 3. I'm going to talk to Jason more about Unoriginal Vinyl. We're going to tell you how we're both doing. But right now, we are going to speak to Toby Morrel of Emery. Enjoy. All right, so we're here now with Toby Morrel. Toby, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to have you here, Toby. You know, Emery has done so much over the years, and we have a brand new album out, Rub Some Dirt on It, which just came out in June, and we're going to cover all of that. But Toby, first, let me ask you, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Just been hanging out at the park with my kids.
Oh, nice. How many kids do you have?
3.
Oh, 3. So you must be really busy all the time.
Yeah, I am.
Where are you living?
I'm up in Champaign, Illinois.
Oh, home of Hum.
Yeah, yep, and REO Speedwagon.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so much good music comes out of there. There must be something in the water.
Yeah, and now 2 Emery guys live here, so that's pretty good.
Yes, you're only adding to the historical musical output of the area now.
Yeah, that's right. Where are you at, Keith?
I am in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, wow. I've been there before. I shot a video there before.
Really? What, for the band?
Yeah. Yeah,
what was the video?
It was for the song "Study in Politics." It was at the I always forget the damn name of the. It's a like a world famous old school boxing gym. It starts with a G. I'll probably remember it an hour after we're done. But yeah, we shot a video there over a decade ago. But it was cool.
Oh, nice. So you grew up in South Carolina?
Yep. Greer, South Carolina.
Yeah, tell us about that. How was it?
Well, it was, I'm older. I'm 46 now. So it was growing up in the 80s. I loved it. I mean, I didn't know any different. So it was, it was small. Greer, South Carolina was very small back then. It's a lot bigger now, but like every other place. But it was fun. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different world when I think about my childhood to now. And that's good and bad. Sometimes I think life was a lot simpler then. We were a lot less connected. And so that I think it was kind of fun. And I think that's why everybody loves stuff like Stranger Things or, like the a callback to that time where we weren't so digitized. I think that it was probably better for us, but now I don't think there's any going back.
No, absolutely not. And, Toby, I think people our age, I'm 40 years old now. I think one good thing about being our age is we saw both sides of it. Back when there was just telephones that you had to press numbers on to dial, and we've seen everything that's happened up till now where it's just the oversaturation of social media and cell phones and everything else.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, like I said, there's no going back, and it is awesome to be this connected and have all this. But yeah, you and I got to experience a world pre-internet, and that'll never happen again. I mean, that's over.
Yeah, and you mentioned Stranger Things. One thing I've realized going back and watching things now, and it's like I miss those mysterious suburban settings. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but we had woods and we had like a mysterious person that we deemed crazy. I don't even know if she was or not, who would walk through the woods and like all these mysteries of childhood. Did you have that kind of thing too?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I remember like behind my house now where my dad lives, the house I grew up in, there's tons of houses around, they developed everything but back then when I was a kid, it was all woods. And so we'd go back there and I can remember like, people would shoot guns. Like I can remember one time we were walking through the woods and I heard a bullet just over my head. Like I heard it in the distance, the gunfire, and then a bullet just shoot over us. And I think it might've just been a hunter. I don't think somebody was like shooting at us, but I just remember thinking, whoa, this is so crazy. And I was with a bunch of kids. I was a kid too. And we all just laid on the ground, scared to death that we might get hit. And we just went home. Like now that might make the news. Everybody would be so scared, but we just went home. You know what I mean? Like now everything's I feel like we're way more connected. We are probably safe in somewhat. We're probably more safe, but more scared.
No, 100%. And I just had this conversation with a friend recently. There was the playing with weapons and dangerous things was a lot more prevalent back in the day, like toy guns, or I remember we were just throwing rocks at each other and I got clocked in the face and was bleeding. I got into a fake knife fight with a friend who came at me with a pocket knife and he cut open my thumb. Like the crazy stuff that you do is just, it seems unbelievable now.
Yeah, you couldn't do half the things you did as a kid now. I mean, I wouldn't let my kids do them. So I mean,
I would hope not.
yeah. I just remembered that boxing gym. It's called Gleason's Boxing Gym. That's what it's called. It's in Brooklyn. So
Oh, I think I've heard of that.
yeah.
Another thing we did, this was good. There was this bridge, this little bridge, and over the side of the bridge, there was this kind of circular concrete little pillar that you could stand on. So we had our friend climb over the bridge and act like he was falling off and like hanging onto the side, and we acted like we were trying to pull him up as cars drove by. That was fun.
You could do all kinds of things. I mean, I toilet papered houses. I did all, we threw golf. We would go to the local driving range, steal a bunch of golf balls, and then ride down the road, throwing them at signs, throwing them at houses, doing all kinds of stuff. You could never get away with that. Now everybody has a camera. I mean, there's a camera everywhere, which that's what I'm saying. It's probably better. We shouldn't have probably been throwing golf balls while driving down the road as teenagers, doing things we shouldn't have done. But at the same time, there's a little bit of fun that's lost and a little bit of adventure that's gone now.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, everybody's got those Ring doorbell things where you can see everything that's going on. And that was the thing. Like with me as a kid, I didn't start getting into real trouble until later. So we were just kids in the suburbs looking for things to do. So we did crazy stuff like that too. Bought paintball guns and went around shooting everything or egging people, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Used to could have a lot of fun.
Maybe we should get back into that. What do you think?
It's gone, man. It's over.
It's probably be a jail sentence now at our age.
Yeah, it really would be.
So talk about your history with music. Is it something that you've always been interested in?
I realized pretty early on, and maybe my family members, like my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff, realized I was a pretty good singer. So I would sing at church a lot. They would ask me to sing. I was always in choir, and then pretty early on, like at the choir in elementary school and middle school and high school, I would get solos. And, I just recognized that people really like my voice. So I thought it must be good enough to, sing in front of people. And so, I think my intro was that. And then pretty early on, my dad found, I think he got it for free. Somebody was getting rid of their piano, and a couple of the keys were out of tune and stuff like that. But I just sat, he didn't even bring it in the house. It sat in the garage, but I would sit out there in the hot summer, on summer vacation from school, and I kind of taught myself a little bit about the piano and just learned some chords on my own. Once again, there was no internet, but I would, I think I talked my dad into buying me a book to, just to learn some old songs. And so, there was something that fascinated me about not only performance, but writing your own music pretty early on.
Yeah. And that's got to be thrilling. Like as a kid, soloing in the choir at church. And not only that, but people seem to be receptive to it and into what you're doing. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's good and bad. Like I thought, man, I must be a really good singer. And then once I started getting into, that was a small pool in Greer, South Carolina in the 80s. Once I started getting the bigger pools, I was like, oh, wait, there's a lot of good singers and they're better than me. So, sometimes it's good and bad, like you, in the sense of your ego and understanding where you're at in your place in the world, I guess.
Yeah. I experienced that ego death time and time again, but I'm learning to embrace it because yes, it's painful, but then you just always come out better from the other side.
Oh, 100%.
So how did you transition from church choir to more band related singing?
Well, in high school, there was like one local band, but I mean, everybody, all they were playing was like Pearl Jam covers, or, it was only covers, or if they had a real song, no one listened to it or cared, and it wasn't good. And so I went to college and ended up with, meeting some musician friends, and we started writing music together. So college was my entry into that, really. Like I had written some songs, by myself on the piano, or I'd started teaching myself guitar a little bit, but once I met them, I started a band, and we mostly did covers, but we wrote like 2 or 3 originals, and then had a buddy that could record, had like a 4-track recorder or a 2-track recorder, I can't even remember, and we recorded a few songs, and then ended up changing colleges, meeting the guys in Emery, and then we all kind of started doing stuff, and that's kind of where it really took off.
Yeah, and I did some research on you, and you mentioned that you got into the bands and all of that and music and the scene a little bit later. I think you were like 23, 24 years old.
Yeah, 100%. I didn't know that there was music outside of the radio until probably mid 20s, basically. So I just didn't know it existed. Like I grew up with the craziest thing I'd ever heard was like Deftones and for a while there it was like Creed or so, like that was maybe Nirvana and stuff, that. But I mean that all still was mainstream. I didn't know there was anything that wasn't radio until about that time.
Right. When I was in high school, and it sounds like you too, those were fringe bands. Like Deftones were not huge. Korn hadn't broken yet. If you listen to like Marilyn Manson and all that kind of stuff, that was like kind of the underground, the mainstream underground provocative stuff.
Yeah. I mean, nobody. I mean, it just wasn't an outlet for it. And once again, when I was listening to music, there wasn't really the internet. The people that introduced me to that music that was underground, I guess if you want to call it that, they were like mailing into labels, and then the label would mail them snail mail, them music, tapes or CDs eventually. That was the only way to find music that wasn't on the radio, because the radio was the only thing I ever knew of how to find music.
Yeah, exactly. I just discovered the scene on accident through friends, and there was a lot of interesting bands going on, and it sounds like you did too. Like I heard you mention you discovered Beloved and Hopes Fall down in North Carolina, right?
Yeah. We went to college in Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So we'd go up to Charlotte and see some bands that were playing. Once we found out there was music that wasn't on the radio, underground music or whatever, we would go see shows with tour. There would be a touring band that we knew. There was a record label out of Charlotte called Deep Elm Records. They're still around, but they were pretty cool back in the day, and had a lot of really cool emo bands, what I call real emo. And then locals would play with them. And so we found some bands like that. Yeah, like Beloved played, or Hopes Fall would play some shows with them. And then we were like, oh, wait, there are bands that are even local that are doing this, because we didn't even know those existed.
Yeah, and discovering this and discovering stuff outside the radio, I guess that started to influence what you and the band were doing as well, yes?
Yeah, it was almost like, oh, wait, now everything that I've ever felt is possible. You know what I mean? Like that's what I thought, because I thought, oh, everything on the radio, I thought, oh, I guess that's all you can do, because I just didn't know any different. And then once I heard music outside of that circle, I realized, oh, wait a minute, everything that I've ever wanted to try is possible. I don't know if it necessarily is successful. We go see bands like, I remember seeing Appleseed Cast up in Charlotte, and there was like 7 people there. And I thought the band was the greatest band in the world. I thought, their music just was so phenomenal. So it didn't mean success, but it did mean you could go on the road, and you might not make any money, but you could play your music in front of 7 people, and they're from Lawrence, Kansas, and they could travel 1,500 miles and play for 7 people in Charlotte. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, similar to you, my only experience was I had only been to one show. It was the first Family Values tour, and it was in a giant stadium type place. I didn't know about underground shows. I didn't know that just people my age playing shows, it seemed like an impossibility. But then when I discovered the scene and I saw that my friends were all in these incredible bands and they were putting on these shows and there was tons of people there, it really invigorated me and made me want to get involved with this thing as well. And it sounds like you as well.
Yeah, for sure. I remember seeing like, I remember we watched Stained. Stained was on tour. I forget the other band that was with them. It was another kind of big band, but I remember seeing Stained, and who else did we see? We went and saw like 311 and Jimmy's Chicken Shack and Incubus, and so we were listening to those bands, and then once we started realizing that other bands were touring through, but like at small, really tiny clubs, that's when we really started heading that way. That was those intimate, smaller shows were just more fun than going to some arena and watching 311 or something.
Exactly, because you could be face to face with the band. And me, when I started going to shows, it was insane bands like Converge and Dillinger Escape Plan, and I would almost get killed at the shows. It was a real thrill.
Yeah, it was great.
So talk about the beginning of Emery. You see these bands were together in college. Talk about how it came together and your first shows.
Well, we let's see. We were in different bands. I was in a band. So I was in a band with Devin and Matt from that are in Emery now. It was called Joe 747, but we just asked them to be in our band because they were in another band called Satchel, and it was just a college band, and we would play some shows in a local bar here and there, but no one cared about our band at all. They just didn't like that music. This is mid 90s and late 90s, and no one cared. So once we were getting ready to graduate college, we were like, wait a minute, we would love to just try this before we go into our careers or anything. Could we make a band together and really be serious about it? And so we ended up forming Emery, and we were like, if we stay in South Carolina, our life is just going to get in the way. Our girlfriends will go, well, let's get, we got our degrees, and so let's use that a little bit, and we'll work jobs and then do the band as well. And we knew that wouldn't make it, that we knew that would fail. So we decided, let's move and go somewhere where all we have is the band. And so we looked around at several different cities and decided upon Seattle. We just thought it would be really cool. We'd never been there. I'd only heard about the music scene there, and just thought it'd be cool. So we left South Carolina and drove 3,000 miles just to be there. And we were like, hey, we'll get a 6-month lease or a year lease. And if in a year, 6 months into a year, if this band isn't working out, we'll go back and get jobs. No big deal. But it ended up working out.
Yeah. I mean, you're still doing it all these years later. Do you ever think about that you made that decision and here you are still now doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty amazing that, I just got off tour. Like I got off tour like about a week ago, and it's kind of crazy that it's still good. I mean, shows are great. Tour is great. We're going on tour in another few weeks. So it is pretty crazy that decision has basically made my whole career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read about this move the band did to Seattle, and I think that's pretty amazing because I've been in the situation where, I don't know, I'm pushing for everyone to focus on the band more, but it's not happening. Or I've been around other bands where it's like, hey, let's relocate or get a house or just focus on this, and it never happens because people are involved with different things or they have different obligations. So I think it's pretty amazing that you were all on the same page and could make such a big move together like this.
Yeah, it was kind of wild. So our original bass player bailed on us before we even left, and so he said he was in love, and so he just totally bailed on us. But another friend ended up just going with us and became our bass player. He was actually a really good blues guitar player, but we were like, hey, we need a bass player. Would you play bass? And so he did. And, but yeah, we were all kind of under the same idea of let's live as cheap as possible. Let's practice as much as possible. See if we can get a record, see if we can play some shows together in Seattle and see what happens. And yeah, you're right. It all worked out.
And you had never been to Seattle before?
No, never. Farthest I'd ever gone was Florida from South Carolina.
What happens if you get there and you hate it? Or I guess that didn't happen, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's the thing. I think people are always scared to risk or something like that. I think that's the biggest issue with people. Like people always live in the what ifs, but is it really that bad if you move somewhere and hate it? At least you hate it. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing that I'd rather know, man, I hate Seattle and I hate being in a band than not to have ever done it and going, you know what, maybe I could have. So I think people should take more risks. I don't know why they don't. Like, it's not that crazy of especially in this day and age. I mean, money means nothing. The world is falling apart. Everything is terrible. Why wouldn't you take some risks and see what happens? At least you would find out, man, that sucks. Like we kind of understood that somehow, that like I would love to go to Seattle, waste all this money and go, this sucks. At least I would know. I'd like, man, yeah. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved and that really was awful. And as opposed to always wishing that maybe I could have done something. Yeah, that doesn't make as much sense to me.
No, you're absolutely right. There's tons of things I've tried in my life that haven't worked out at all, but I'm so happy that I took the risk and gave it a shot.
Yeah. 100%.
So what do you do when you get to Seattle? Do you just start looking for an apartment first? I mean, how does that work logistically?
Yeah, we had like a trailer that we were given, and so you could sleep in it. So we pulled it behind Matt, our guitar player's Tahoe, and we would sleep in it. We built all these bunks in it. So it had probably 7, 8 bunks in it. And we pulled up to a national, not a national park, but I guess it was a local state park. It was really beautiful. And we slept there in that trailer for a couple of weeks while we looked around where we wanted to live. And we didn't end up in Seattle proper. We ended up in Renton, which is a suburb of Seattle. And we just got an apartment, and we got a year lease. And so we stayed there for a year, and we all got like part-time jobs, just enough to pay the bills and, eat some food. I mean, but very poor. And then we tried to go to shows and meet people. And eventually we did. And we found out where, small shows were happening, met some bands. And then those friendships ended up helping us get on shows. And then from there, once you meet people in the local scene, and, because not tooting our own horn, but we were cool people. People liked us. They liked our music, but also they just liked us as people. And I think on a side note, a lot of new bands don't understand that. Like, if you can just be cool around other bands, that's more important than maybe even your music. Because if people want you around, like in the green room or at a show, that means more oftentimes than how cool your breakdown is or something. But your breakdowns matter to the masses, but to get on shows and stuff like that, you just got to kind of be chill, kind of be a likable, easy person to be around. And fortunately, we were that way. And so we got into the scene, and then from there, it just so happened that one of the guys in the scene ended up working for Tooth and Nail Records, and he was like, "Man, we recorded our first album on our own. We saved up enough money. What we ended up doing was." We said, let's all work these part-time jobs, and 75% of our paycheck will go to paying our bills, but also savings so that we could record our own record. And there was a lot of bands, like that band I talked about earlier, Appleseed Cast, Beautiful Mistake, had gone to Eudora, Kansas and recorded with Ed Rose. And we thought, man, we really want to go there. So we saved up enough money as a band and recorded that first record, and then we shopped it around. And since our buddy, now that we had played shows with, his band was called Flying or Falling. His name is John Dunn. He ended up working at Tooth and Nail. He was just in the mailroom, but he was like, "Hey, listen, this is a local band called Emery. Here's their new record," and they're shopping it around. And that's how we ended up on Tooth and Nail.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it must have been an exciting time. I mean, you move out to Seattle, you don't know anybody, you're young, you're with your friends, you're putting all of your focus into this music, you're living in the park for a few weeks and just discovering the scene and figuring things out. I mean, it had to have been a great time.
Yeah, it really was. It was a lot of fun. There's oftentimes I miss it, like how little responsibility, like I could totally focus on only the things I wanted to do as opposed to the things that I have to do.
I think about that a lot. I'm like, what did I do when I was young? Because now every day is so full. I plan things out by the hour. I'm like, what was I doing when I was young? Like, what? I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I know. You used to have so much time and you wasted it.
How do you balance it now? You've got 3 kids, you've got a wife, you've got the band, you've just got more and more and more stuff.
Yeah. Well, I guess now it works out that it was harder before because my kids were younger. Now that my kids are just a hair older, we're able to work some stuff out with my wife's work schedule and my schedule, but it's still difficult. I don't think I do a good job at it, but we would never probably take a tour. Like, we tour a decent amount for who we are and where we're at in our career, but we would never do like a 7-week tour. That would I just wouldn't even want to be away from my family that much. None of us would want to in the band. So the way we tour now is like, we'll go out for 7 to 10 days and then be home, for a month or so. And that just works for us. A lot of bands, it wouldn't work. And it probably, you would make more money on like if Emery decided to do a 7-week tour, we would make more money and it would be, beneficial in a lot of ways, but it's just not who we are or what we want to do. Like, I mean, it was very fun being on this last tour, but we toured from a Tuesday to a Sunday. and then I was home on Monday. So I don't really want to do much more than that right now. Like, especially with like after COVID opened up the door to like digital performances, and ours did really well. And I think a lot more bands are going to take that opportunity to do that, because you can watch your favorite band perform live from the comfort of your own living room, and the show sounds better and looks better than your local sound guy, and local club. I mean, it just does, because we spent a lot of money on those. And so like, we want them to be good. We want them to sound great. We want them to be, all our camera folks to be in all the right spots, and to make everything, you get to see Emery in a way that you never have before. So that is even a new thing that I think is going to catch on even more, because I mean, like this last tour we went on, we were just talking about today on our podcast, just to get to the first show was 20% of the entire cost of the tour, just to get to the first show. 20%. I mean, that's crazy. I mean,
what's that in gas?
Gas, flights. The flights were insane. From Seattle to fly to Atlanta were, round trip for all the Seattle guys was over $1,000 each. And that used to be like, $300 or something. Now it's $1,000, it was just, it was insane. And then, the way, and then gas, our van is a diesel van. So that's oftentimes close to $6, or if not over $6 a gallon. And it's just, that just costs a lot when you're like, oh man, I got to drive, 400 miles today, or so, 300 miles, something like that. So
yeah, it's wow.
Yeah.
How does it work? Do you all meet in Atlanta, and then someone has the van down there? Or how does it work logistically?
Yeah, we had the van, and we drove it down from Champaign to Atlanta, and everybody else is on the West Coast and flew down.
Yeah, and no, I think that's the way you have to do it at our age. I wouldn't want to be out on the road for 7 weeks in a row, especially if I had a family. I mean, you can if you have a family.
Yeah, it's really hard.
So you signed with Tooth and Nail. They pick up the record that you recorded, yes?
Yep.
So I imagine that you saw a pretty big jump in interest in the band after that was released.
Yeah, back then, another thing too now, that's what is another interesting thing, is that when we signed to Tooth and Nail, the internet was still, it was up and running and good and, influential, but music labels still were like the most important thing for a band. So just getting that name recognition with Tooth and Nail meant a lot. Now I think you're going to see more and more bands like just doing their own thing. And that's even happening. Bands are doing their own thing. Like we signed to Tooth and Nail back then though, because we were like, well, we need a label. We got some offers for some other labels, but it just made sense to sign to Tooth and Nail. They gave us the best deal. We were in Seattle, they were in Seattle. And so it ended up working out. And yeah, so once our first album came out, it really hit. Like it was kind of crazy, because we saved up enough money to pay for our own album, and then Tooth and Nail bought that from us. But then that first record really hit and blew up, and then the rest is history, kind of.
Yeah, around what year? What year was that when the first record came out?
Like 2003.
Yeah, so the internet is around, but it's not like we're not into the age yet where you could just Google an album and then instantly download it with one click.
Right. Yeah, not at all.
And that kind of really changed the landscape of things, I guess, around 2008 and 9.
Yep, 100%. By the time our third record came out, not only could you download the record and, even not even pay for it, but you could also critique it and tell the world, that didn't, and everybody could say good or bad stuff about your record by the time we were on our third record. So we went from, internet not mattering as much to it only mattered.
Yeah. Now I've heard you talk about the third record a lot. That's I'm Only a Man, the LP. Yes.
Yep.
Now tell me if I have the story right. First album, well, we have really good sales. Second album, we have even better sales. So the third album, everybody's geared up and you're like, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. We're going to hold out for some amazing deals. And that didn't quite happen, right?
Yeah. It still sold well, but it wasn't bigger than our first two. So we thought that, first record killed, second record even bigger, third record is going to be even bigger, and then it just was kind of average. And so it was a disappointment in the sense of we thought we might be going to the next level as a band. And yeah, that didn't end up happening.
How does that fare with like the label? Do they need it to sell even more, or are they happy with the way it's performing? Like, how does that work?
I mean, they still made money on it for sure. Like,
Yeah,
a lot more money than we ever did. but yeah, I mean, I think even them, they thought, everybody thought this was the next stage of what Emery would be. And so I think everybody probably was disappointed in sales just because we thought, well, what is going to happen? But at the same time, like I said, our record came out when everybody started realizing, wait a minute, you can, critique a record online. You can say this and that, and nobody had understood what that was yet. I mean, I still don't think we understand social media today, what it is, what it means to us, how it affects us, what it does mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so I think we were right in this crazy whirlwind of, oh, wait, people can go online now and say whatever they want about your record. And it wasn't even, I'm not even saying it was that much people. Most people love the record. Like we redid it, and that was our first special, and people loved it, and it killed. But at the time, you're going, wait a minute, this record, we thought it was going to be, take us to the next level, and it was just average. And
how did you deal with any criticism that you got? I mean, because I've never experienced that on such a large level, where the internet is new and this outpouring of criticism. If people want to deliver it to you, they can. Like, I'm sure you saw a lot of that. Like, how do you feel about that? How do you deal with that at the time?
Yeah, I didn't handle it well. Once again, majority of people thought the record was great, but so what ended up happening was Tooth and Nail picked a song that picked the least heaviest song on the record. It's called The Party Song, and which is still one of our biggest songs, which is crazy. But at the time, a lot of fans thought we were selling out or trying to get on the radio or something. They just people think things immediately, and so we wanted the last song on the record to come out, but Tooth and Nail disagreed, and so we were like, okay, well, you're the label, we trust you guys. I wish we wouldn't have trusted them on that, but we have a great relationship with Tooth and Nail, but that was a bad decision on their part. So they put that out, and people run with something like, oh, Emery's, they people will say a band's a sellout as fast as they possibly can. Like, people will say that immediately as soon as they hear, first 10 seconds of a song on their new album. And so I didn't handle it well. And yeah, I was frustrated that people could not understand that we'd worked so hard on this record, that we'd put so much time into lyrics and melodies and music and guitar parts and finding this producer that we liked. And that people could just go, yeah, this is, stupid. And so, that was not good.
Yeah, and people, especially people in the scene, I don't know if it happens as much now, but certainly back then, will make snap judgment calls that aren't even true. Like, in my own personal experience, I would make a decision about a band that I realize now wasn't even true, and would just write them off for years based on something that I completely made up. And now I go back and look at that, and I'm like, I was completely wrong. Like, what the hell was I doing?
Yeah. Well, it's easy to do. You know what I mean? I understand it, especially when we're talking about 2008, where you got on a message board and you're like, I'm just going to talk. I understand it now, but at the time, it didn't feel good.
Yeah, well, when people are young, they don't have the knowledge and the experience and everything else. Like, I don't know, if a band I really like changed their sound up or tried something different, I guess sometimes I would go with it and sometimes I didn't. But I think as an artist, you need to do that. And plus, you guys are young. You're figuring out the industry. You're figuring out yourselves as bands. You're changing things up a bit. I think that's what you have to do as an artist.
Yeah, 100%. We just never could have stayed the same. There are bands that wrote very similar records over and over and over, and we just could never have done that. It just, I'm very proud of the record, all the records we wrote. It was who we were at the time, and so I never look back disappointed. Honestly, at the time I was hurt that people could be so harsh about something, but I still stand by our record and our music. I always think it's great. I've said it a million times. I'm Emery's biggest fan. Like, if I don't love our music the most, why would you? So I want to be the biggest fan so that other people go, man, I can be a fan too. Because if I'm just putting music out just to put it out as opposed to loving it, then I don't think anybody should like it, you know?
Right. And I don't think you and the band would be doing this for decades if you didn't stand
Right.
behind what you're producing, you know?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm Only a Man comes out. Not everybody loves it. Like, how does that change you? Does it change your approach at all? I mean, does it make you tougher or just change up how you do things?
I don't know. I think the next record that came out is one of our best. So I would say that maybe on some level that we were influenced, like, you know, work hard. You know, I think up until that point, our first 2 records killed, and then our second record was average. We're like, oh, wait a minute, every record doesn't kill. You know, I think going back to that ego thing. So for me, I think it ended up making us work harder, which is actually really great. Like being able to realize, wait a minute, we have to continue to work and push ourselves. That actually was helpful.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I think the energy that you put into the thing, that gets reflected and that people can pick up on that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Well, you have a new album out, Rub Some Dirt on It. And to everyone listening, this just came out June 24th via Tooth and Nail. So if you haven't heard it yet, you really need to. It's an excellent LP. Toby, I love it. And this is the first new album since 2018, yes?
Yeah. Yeah. We hadn't put out, I mean, COVID stopped the whole world, but it's nice to have a new album, and we recorded it ourselves. And we have a Emery Land, and the Knuckle Breakers is kind of like a support crew that helps us, you know, supports us financially and, you know, even emotionally and maybe even critically. But they've been really helpful. It's just fans of the band, and so we did it ourselves, and we gave it to just the Emery Landers late last year, and then everybody liked the record so much. We took that criticism like, man, this is a great Emery record from our fans. They were like, whoa, this is really good. Like, we're really enjoying this. And then because of that, we were like, well, who knows? We're still in contact with Tooth and Nail, and Tooth and Nail wanted to help us with, we did a licensing deal, which basically just got us some advertising for the record. And so we put it out again as a licensing deal with Tooth and Nail, and it's been going great.
That's excellent. You said you recorded it yourself. So what is the process like? Do you record everything yourself and then you just put it out directly to your Knuckle Breaker fans?
Yeah. Matt and Josh and Chris in our band are all phenomenal at music production. They've been working forever at it. And so recording it with them just makes a lot of sense because we know what we want and we know what we want to do. And so we don't necessarily need to go to a producer. A producer maybe in the future could be a cool idea, just an outside voice. But we often know what and how we want something to sound. So it works really good now just to keep everything in-house.
And how does that work? Is it like a Patreon thing where only the supporters of the band get the record? Like how does that work?
Yeah, it was like that. So basically, Emeryland gets everything first, and then if in Emeryland they are loving it and thinking it's amazing and awesome, you know, we do EP covers, we do we'll do an EP with covers, I should say, and we'll do, you know, little side project songs or individual songs, and we give them all to the Emerylanders. But if something comes out that people really like, then we'll put it out to the whole world. That's
good. It's kind of like a testing ground. You can see how people react to things and decide if you want to take it to the next level.
Yeah, 100%. It's been great, actually. It was pretty phenomenal how amazing those group of people are, and like helped us survive COVID. I mean, because we couldn't tour, we couldn't do, we couldn't do much of anything. And so those folks helped us figure out our direction with the band. Helped us be a springboard for these songs are good, these putting stuff out. I mean, it's been phenomenal for us.
Yeah, and it must feel amazing, number one, to have a great new record out, and number two, to be able to go out and perform gigs again, because all of us thought it was never going to happen again.
Yeah, you're right.
How did the most recent tour go?
It was great. Yeah, it was really good. I think it's funny because we're in a weird time right now where, once again, inflation is huge, and people have to decide where and how they can spend their money. But there was a lot of people that came out and supported and really made the tour really fun.
I love that. That's awesome. So you have a podcast as well.
Yep. We have a podcast. It's called It's All Over.
Yes. Now, I was researching this and I was like, wait, I thought it was Bad Christian, but it switched over from Bad Christian to It's All Over. Yes?
Yeah. We wanted to take a break from Bad Christian. Bad Christian has had some ups and downs, and we wanted to just kind of move on to kind of doing a podcast that's just fun, basically more comedy, cutting up, having a good time, and move away from Bad Christian. Bad Christian is more like on a hiatus. We'll probably start it back up sometime in the future, but right now this has been going great.
So what are some of the ups and downs? I mean, it was focused on religious discussion and all that type of thing. I imagine that can stir up things from time to time.
Yeah. We had one of the original members that started the podcast with us ended up having kind of a mental breakdown, and it was really tough to navigate that. And on both sides, we didn't do it that well, and eventually had to part ways. And so that's that we didn't really stop. Like after he left, we kept going because once again, we wanted the listeners. We didn't. This was after he left. COVID happened like 3 months later, or if not 2 months later. Yeah, I mean, COVID was happening, but it really got crazy, lockdowns and stuff about 2.5 months later, and so we wanted to keep going and do the podcast, but because everybody was locked in their houses, and we're like, well, we're not going to just stop this and give them nothing. And these people have been with us for years. And so we did that, but it kind of, at this point, we were like, you know what, we need time to really step away from this and take a break from all that has happened with the podcast. And so it's really nice to move on to do something a little different with It's All Over, just to have fun and cut up and have a really good time.
Yeah. And from what I heard, that's what it is. Just friends having fun and conversation. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's been great.
How do you like podcasting? How did you decide? How did you get into it?
Well, we started as bloggers, but we realized we were really bad at writing. So podcasting makes sense. We could talk. Talking's a lot easier.
Yeah. When did it start? What year did you first start it?
We started Bad Christian probably, I think it was around 2014. I think it was around that time. And and that's what's so funny about the internet. I mean, even podcasting wasn't near as big or as important, and way less podcasters back then. And now, less than 10 years later, everybody has a podcast. So it was just kind of the right time, like, to start one. And in that niche of people, deconstructing from Christianity or something, it just really kind of hit at that time.
Was there any particular show or anything that inspired you to start one, or?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I used to listen to WTF with Mark Maron. Early on, Rogan, was already a player. I mean, now he's way more massive. I used to listen to some drama podcasts, like storyline podcasts. I listened to, I was definitely early on podcasts before a lot of people. Like I would talk to people. I was like, "Oh, did you hear this podcast?" And they wouldn't even know what a podcast was. And I was like, "Oh, I guess it's just me. I don't know how I slipped into this world," but I just liked it because I always enjoyed like talk radio. I just like hearing people's thoughts and ideas, regardless of even if I agree with them. I always just thought that was interesting. And so I was just kind of an early bird to that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. In my darkest days, I always liked to listen to talk radio, even if it was bad, even if it was something I didn't care about, because if I'm like sitting there by myself and in bad shape, it's like I have friends with me having a conversation. Yeah,
100%. That's probably the best. When people say that they love our podcast, that's what I enjoy the most, hearing them say, "Man, it's just like I'm hanging out with my buddies." That's so fun.
And I too used to have a partner who I did the show with, and he left because he had to focus more with his family. So I know how that can be. Like someone leaves, the whole dynamic changes. You almost have to start over in a way.
Yeah, you do. But I mean, some of that's good too. If you really care about it, you keep going and figuring it out. But it is tough when they leave.
You have your own record label as well, right?
We used to, but it ended up not making any money and costing us a lot, so we stopped.
It was Bad Christian, the label, right?
Yeah. We had some bands, and we tried to go the route of like almost like legacy bands that we knew that already had some followers, and try to just support them and give them good deals, so that it worked for them, but it just doesn't make any money. Like it was just really hard, and we lost money, and we couldn't afford it anymore.
How long did you do it for?
A few years, 3 years, 4 years, maybe.
Yeah, it's almost like gambling. You just have to keep putting things out and keep doing it and keep it afloat and just hope that, I guess, there's going to be a payoff someday.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you find that podcasting can be expensive, or are your costs pretty low? I find that the more time that goes on, the more expensive it gets and the more work there is, but I love it. So it's just something I'm willing to keep doing. And it's not incredibly expensive. It's not like being in a band or recording a record even. It's like it's not that much.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some gear, involved or whatever, and whatever platform you want to use, like we were using Zencaster, or if you use Zoom or something, there might be a monthly charge or something like that. But otherwise, it's about as cheap as it can get. I mean, we're trying to get into maybe a little bit more video, and adding some of those components. So that might cost a little bit, but overall, podcasting is about as cheap as you can get.
Exactly. I think that's why there is so many of them, because it is easier to start up. Now, don't get me wrong. It's hard to do it and be good, right? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, you just go on and you talk about whatever and then it's going to be good. But that's not exactly how it works. But startup wise, yes, it's easy. It's good to have a good mic, but you don't even need a good mic necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, anybody can do it. I mean, you could do it with your iPhone if you wanted to.
Yeah. I've heard of people doing that, and well, it doesn't sound so great.
Yeah. We have some friends that do it in it's called Minivan Mamas, and they do it in their minivan because they have kids and it's the quietest place they can be. So they just sit in their car and record, and it actually sounds pretty good, and they do a pretty good job. So it's funny. You can really podcast and just have a conversation anywhere.
At one point I read, it was during the band or during a hiatus or something, you became the worship leader of a church.
Yeah, I did that for a little while. I did that for a couple of years, but eventually I just decided I didn't want to do that anymore.
What does that entail? Like, what do you do?
Just lead worship. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Just, go show up on Sundays and lead the band for the most part.
That's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I liked it while I did it, for sure. It was a fun job.
And where are you at now with your faith now compared to maybe when you were younger? Like things that I believed throughout my life, whether it be I used to be heavily into certain political beliefs, or I was into conspiracy theories for a minute, and I would just kind of like jam it awkwardly into the conversation, and then it would be weird, or I don't know. Where I'm at now, I just kind of believe what I believe. And if other people are into that, that's cool. And if they're not, that's cool too. And I don't know. I'm just kind of focused on what I'm doing and what I'm creating. Where are you at with everything?
I'd say about the same. I mean, I there's nothing, there's nothing else that I just don't feel the need to share my beliefs or force anybody to believe the way I used to believe or the way I do believe now. I think it's just overall to me, it's just how would I say it? I guess overall to me, I still believe in God, but I don't have that desire anymore to try to convert people or change them. I'm where I'm at with me, and that's good enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. Plus, I think the way things are structured in this country, and just there's a lot of divisiveness. People are pitted against each other because their beliefs don't exactly line up. So I try to circumvent that by getting along with everyone. Well, as long as they're not like a neo-Nazi or some extremist, the type of person I wouldn't even want to deal with. But I think fundamentally, if we're on the same page, if we want the best for people, if we want the best for ourselves, then we can get along.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So let's talk about what we've got coming up. Now, we have the new album out, Rub Some Dirt on It. You said you have another tour coming up?
Yeah, it's just another leg of this tour. Basically, we split up our tour into legs. The first tour leg we just got off of, it was just us and Aaron Gillespie and Idle Threat. But this next leg, we're adding Norma Jean.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it'll be a good one for sure.
So we've got the next leg of the tour, right? And we're gonna have some new music at some point, right? I mean, the album just came out, but the band is going to continue. We're going to keep producing, yes?
Oh yeah. We'll be working on new music soon.
Excellent. What do you do in your downtime when you're not podcasting and running record labels and creating in the band?
Just being a dad, That's basically what I do. Because, I mean, like I said, my wife, for a long time, my wife didn't work or only had, small part-time jobs, but now she has a full-time job. So when I'm at home, I'm kind of like, ushering them to school and, getting them ready and trying to do some, just stay-at-home dad stuff, I guess. That's basically what my life is. And in between that is podcasting and trying to write new music and do stuff like that.
Have your kids heard or seen the band? What do they think of it?
They think it's kind of cool, but I don't know if they totally care. They they just think it's all right.
Toby, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. You and the band have created so much excellent music over the years that I love, that many people love, and keep it up. This has been great. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith.
And there you have it, Toby Morrel. Wow, that was a great conversation. Like you were talking about in the beginning of the episode, Jason, that's a big move, just picking a place to live. We like Nirvana, we like these other bands. Let's go to Seattle and check it out. And the fact that they were able to meet people there and build up the band to what it is now is just pretty incredible. And kind of, the story Toby was telling about how they thought they had this big deal on the horizon and they were holding out and it just never came. And, expectations versus reality. He was really forthcoming, and I just thought it was a great conversation.
Yeah, you did a great job facilitating that. Not only that, but I also love Emery's create first and then ask questions later model. Their ambition and drive seems to be completely coming from well-intentions that the art has to exist, and then they'll figure out a way for commerce to either pay for it or make it available to their fan base. And they're at the point now, because I think not just of Emery, but a lot of their podcast success with both Bad Christian and the Labeled podcast and all the things that they've constantly got going, where they're just out there creating, and the audience has now found them and relies and trusts in their narrative voice or their musicality enough to pursue it. They're going to chase down Emery as fans for life. That's a pretty unique niche that they've found.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can relate to that. Over the past 5 years or so, I've found that I just need to be creating whatever it is. If it's a band or if it's some little video I'm putting together, or if it's this podcast now, I just need to be constantly creating and putting stuff out there. And it sounds like Toby and Emery are the same way.
Absolutely. I find that highly admirable. It's great.
So you worked on their latest record too. You did the vinyl, yes, for Rub Some Dirt on It?
Yeah, I think what happened with that one was the album was created. The mock-ups or idea of what they wanted for the packaging had been started. And then, as oftentimes is the case, we get a call as essentially a graphic design service provider, also somewhat authorities on manufacturing and production capabilities, where we can turn wild ideas into practical, physical realities for folks who maybe just have the great idea and that's where it stops. So yeah, that's kind of how Rub Some Dirt on It came about. And then, again, from the model of create first, ask questions later, only after they had signed us to do the packaging for them and after they had the album fully recorded and then a lot of investments had been made by the fan community, did they end up re-signing to a record label. So that's interesting. Totally the opposite model from what you would expect.
Yeah, it sounds like you're the guy I need, Jason, because I always have a lot of great ideas, but I don't have Photoshop or anything to actually piece it together.
Yeah, so Unoriginal Vinyl started in 2017, about after, as a vinyl collector for over 20 years, I had started to see a very tapering down of quality in terms of what was becoming just boilerplate, generic serving up of ultimately very important legacy albums where maybe they weren't large enough for a major label such as Universal or Warner to understand their significance to the fan community. But in fact, the fan community were clamoring for a reissue so bad that they were beginning to accept anything they got, independent or regardless of the quality of the finished product. They were just happy to have that record finally on vinyl because it was either out of print or maybe it had never been made in the 90s or 2000s on vinyl. And so seeing this open window where a lot of record labels and artists didn't have a guy for that just made me immediately want to jump in and start creating packaging for, at first, rather obscure artists from Sweden or from Louisville, Colorado, here in Colorado where I'm based, or things like that. But then very quickly starting to take a business background that I have and a full-time career in business, working for a major food and beverage company here in the United States, taking some of those principles and understanding that a lot of what keeps good packaging or good artwork from existing in the vinyl world is simply that these labels don't have a designated person for that, if that makes sense. They don't have somebody who excels at packaging or somebody who will do the research or even be willing to reach out to the artists for the artists' input on the ultimate edition of their album that came out in 1997. You name the artist, and there's probably plenty of examples where there have been very generic, corporatized, unthoughtful reissues on vinyl. You can probably name 5 examples of that right now, just off the top of your head. And we wanted to serve as the antithesis to that, the curated museum quality production team that would essentially operate like a museum or a cultivation society of our scene to preserve memories. I was doing that through documentary films, through vinyl records, through books, a lot of different ways that we've tried to contribute to making something that existed a while ago relevant again today. We're not a nostalgia label. We want things to feel tactily real and experiences to be translated and communicated to those that we love in a modern and relevant way today. And that seems to be something that artists love and the labels love. The labels just love somebody who can logistically solve for those problems for them. The graphic design problems, the licensing problems, the paperwork, the artist relationships from legacy artists that aren't even on the label anymore. They don't have a guy for that. And so that's kind of where we've found our unique triangulation in the scene, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So you're like the middleman.
Definitely the middleman. I like to think of it more like this, Keith, if I'm being honest with you. If there is an X and a Y axis, and the X axis represents full artist interest and high integrity for artists. The higher you go on the X axis, you get higher in terms of ultimately serving what the artist wants and all of their intentions. And then the Y axis might be going a different direction towards labels' expressed concerns or interests that have more to do with basic fundamental commerce. How much do things cost? What's the economic reality of pressing 2,000 records versus 500 records? What do those things mean? How easy or hard are the licenses to obtain? Those things all exist on the Y-axis. Well, unoriginal vinyl is on the Z-axis, if you're familiar. We're not even considering where both of those interests end up. We are going a completely different offshoot direction, and the end user for us is the fan who holds that thing in their hands and has the best experience possible with that artifact. That makes it feel relevant, new, fresh, and also important to their whole life's story. Not just nostalgia, but anything else.
I love that. And I love that you say not just nostalgia or the past, because I don't like to be hung up on the past either. My mission statement is acknowledge the past, live in the present.
Yep, exactly right.
There you go. Now that's interesting, Jason. You mentioned reaching out to the artist and getting their input on this thing. So that makes me think, like, have there been releases where the artist isn't even contacted and then they just kind of throw something together and then that's what comes out?
That happens daily in the music industry, all the time.
Wow.
That happens constantly because oftentimes what happens is a major label will own both the master recording rights and the publishing of an artist. They'll own both. And then if somebody wants to use that artist's music on a television show, they will, meaning the master use holder or the label, will pay royalties to the songwriter, but they themselves own the recorded music, and so they don't have to pay anything for those. So they'll solicit NBC or CBS or say to a game show, would you like to use this Death Cab for Cutie song from 2003? And the game show might say, yeah, that sounds fantastic. That label then pockets the money that they sold to the TV show for the master recordings, but then they just pay artist royalties to the artist. The artist might not even have any stake in whether or not it's a game show they would like to be a part of or support. It just happens. It's just part of the process in the music industry. So oftentimes, similarly, vinyl reissues happen where the artist is not reached out to. There's no questions given to the artist of whether or not they would like to tell their version of the story. And so me, again, being on the Z-axis, get to say, hey, I'm way out here in art design fan world. As a graphic designer and a fan of your band, I'd love to tell your story better through this physical media package. That can be a book, it can be a record, it can be a documentary film. We've done all of those things, producers of.
So has there ever been an instance where you've reached out to a band and they're like, whatever, I don't know, do whatever you want?
Oftentimes, yes. Yeah, it's everything, man. It's just people, it's just how people are. You'll get people who don't want to talk about something that happened 3 days ago, let alone in 1997.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I imagine if it's a band from a long time ago, they're like, oh, I haven't thought about that in a while. Like, do whatever you want.
Or they might have just nothing to say. They might have no insight. They might not have no critical, thoughtful addition to the narrative about why it's relevant today. But then Lars from NPR might have something really vibrant and really critical and amazing to say. So I'll just use a lot of the networks and connections that I have everywhere in this scene as a neutral party. You know what I mean? I'm not a label, so people don't have this beef or hang up with Unoriginal Vinyl, the label, because no such thing exists. It's just the guy who's doing cool art for bands. So if you look at any of our social media about all the records that we've worked on, they're essentially all just collaborations, sometimes exclusively with artists, sometimes with record labels. Sometimes they are just odd job contract things or producing documentary films. We did a documentary film about the history of ska music with a director out of Bend, Oregon called Taylor, called Pick It Up, Ska in the 90s. And it was a lot of fun. We had a great time going out and filming and just talking to bands. They sometimes have nothing to say. The bands might not have any insight. So we'll get the people who have the best thing to say about that music scene, about that venue, about that band, somebody to say something interesting.
Have you ever worked on a release where the band didn't really care about it, but then they saw the great job you did with the new release and it just renewed their interest in the whole thing?
That happens, I would say, semi-frequently. Yes. I would say maybe a Sponge would be a good example of that out of Detroit, where Sponge really, there was a license opportunity to do Wax Ecstatic, which was a record that followed up their big hit record, Rotting Pinata. Let's call it 1996 this happened. Never was put on vinyl. And reaching out to the band, they said, we don't really have a lot to say, but I was friends with the A&R man at Capitol back in the days when Sponge was signed to a major label in the 90s, and he had a boatload to say. So he wrote almost too much, maybe 20,000 words. More than could fit in a vinyl record packaging, but his contribution to the liner notes and writing up an essay plus a retrospective on every single song that made the final cut for the record got the band extremely hyped, got the band extremely desirous to play some more shows, to have something to sell at the merch tables, to get excited about the celebration of their legacy now, which is fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, Jason, it's almost like we're almost doing the same thing, but in different formats. Like, I like to get to the core of the band, tell the story of the band, tell the story of the person in the band I'm talking to, and deliver that conversation to the people. You're almost doing the same thing, but for the band, and then putting that into the art and the packaging for this release that's going to come out.
Yeah, and selfishly, I'm doing it for myself as a vinyl collector and a fan of these bands. There have been plenty of opportunities and projects that we've been approached on that we could just be a graphic design company and take the job and the paycheck and run. But this is literally how we spend all of our free time apart from our families. We have both Bruno in Switzerland and I are essentially the two founders of Unoriginal Vinyl. We've got full-time careers and full-time families and responsibilities. So if we're going to spend time on any projects, it's got to be something that we would be proud to own as fans of those bands or those records. So to your point, it's more of just saying the end user for us is different than the end user for an artist or for a record label. The end user for us is us as fans wanting to own that thing and have it be the most rad story ever. Me jumping off the stage at Life in Your Way at Furnace Fest this year to sell the record for the very first time creates an experience and a memory for not just me, but everybody who met me in the pit and then saw me acting like a wild Tasmanian devil for the whole entire set, singing every word and screaming every word to the band set. Every person is going to remember how they got that record. They're going to get their OB, they're going to have it match the jacket at Furnace Fest, and they're going to have a memory like, those dudes are wild animals, truly. They didn't want to follow the conventional merch table equals bringing stuff down to Birmingham. They were in it with us as fans because they're experiencing this music and this art form of vinyl records as fans first. That's kind of the experience we want to have. And we're going to go out there and just manifest it.
I like that. It's pretty unique what you're doing. It's not a label exactly, and it's not just a graphic design company exactly. It's a pretty unique thing you're doing.
It's, I think, what I would hope people would get, labels, artists, or fans, would be that if you saw a robot logo of an unoriginal vinyl release, quote unquote, in your vinyl record collection, and you saw that logo on the back, it would mean to you that this was handled with care and consideration, and it brought it into a state of relevance instead of it just existing in a state of like, this old record from 1991's out again, and this time Unoriginal Vinyl did it, and then next time it might be Craft Recordings who does it. It's really meant to say this is handled for the fan experience to be optimal.
So how deep do you go when working with a new artist and a new release? Do you talk to the band? Do you talk to management? Do you talk to people who know the band? Like, how deep does it go?
Absolutely every single one of those is true, yes. Ultimately, when I'm having conversations, I go around the country and I talk to store owners at a Target or a Walmart, complete strangers to me. I do that about 5 times, 6 times a week, you know? I'll get in a car and train somebody on how to talk to a customer, essentially, about our beverage line at their store. And for me, that organic moment of just finding somebody's comfort zone, matching their pace and tone and what their concerns or interests are, as we are doing right now, Keith, I'll give you an example. Finding the common ground between what you're doing, preserving these bands' stories narratively through this podcast. You and I have found that common ground, essentially. So it's my job to find that within the first 15 minutes of every conversation. It's an art form. It's a talent that I've sort of acquired over 20 years of doing it. You know what I mean? So if it's meeting the former wife of a lead singer of a band, and the reason that they broke up was because that singer of the band wanted to tour in 2001 more than the wife did or something like that, I'm going to get that story pulled out of that wife.
Does that ever cause problems? I could imagine you're going to see the ex-wife of the singer, and then the singer's like, yo, what are you doing talking to her?
I mean, mostly the only problems I run into are with managers, because managers of bands always want to know what their bottom line is. So not the personal stories. You know, if by the time I have found them, it's usually by referral. If there's a personal connection to me talking to a personal member of a band or a friend of the band or something like that, you know, there's an implied trust or a pathos that's already been established there. So they don't feel as if there's like a weird, well, what's this person going digging into our business? It's not like that. It's just, again, me explaining to them who the end user is going to be here. If it serves the narrative of making this album feel relevant in 2022, I'm going to look for it. And I'm going to omit the rest of the details. All the superfluous, gossipy stuff, that's not what I'm here to do. You know what I mean? But if it creates a better experience for the fans reading that retrospective essay, I think that's ultimately where the best stuff comes out of.
That's excellent. Yeah, so it's referrals. It's not like you're just showing up on the doorstep like, hey, tell me about your ex-wife, or ex-wife, tell me about the singer.
No, it's just, there's no cold calling anymore in this. At this point, it's I've heard about you, I know what you're up to, and we think it's great. And the people who don't think it's great or don't want their story to be told that way, or they want to control essentially the narrative, that's fine. I don't have to work with you. There's a million other projects I could do in my very limited spare time. You know what I mean? There's a lot of examples where, for instance, there's a roaring community or a fan enthusiasm towards putting out an album on vinyl for the very first time, right? But you're met with the band essentially non-existent at all. They don't have any social media presence. They have no interaction with their fan community at all. If that's not a lever that the label can access or I can access, it really limits the audience and the buying audience to those people who are just, singing the praises of an album from 2004. That's not really enough anymore. It's when everybody comes together and quote collabs, you know what I mean, to make something happen that I find the most interesting content comes out of, the most interesting packaging comes out of, when those band members feel like they were a major part of the process artistically. It's rewarding to them. It's rewarding to them to look at their album artwork with new eyes. Juliana Theory, Emotion is Dead is a good example of that. Having pointed conversations with Brett Dieter and Josh Fielder from that band about the artwork and the way that it was created back in 2000 led to a reimagining of the artwork that felt, with the vinyl release, exactly the same feeling you would get looking at that CD, but we fixed the things that were wrong with the artwork. The lady on the front cover, for instance, was translucent for no reason at all. You could see wires, like telephone wires, behind her skin. It made no sense at all. So when we put out the vinyl reissue, we colored in her palette so that there's no wires going through her body. It's not really serving a narrative juxtaposition to the original artwork. It's just making it better and smarter,
That's good. Yeah, and it's like a second chance to fix everything. You get to actually do that and improve things.
That's the hope. Yeah. And so Zayo is another good example where a band really didn't like the artwork for a record that they put out in 1999, Liberate te ex inferis. It's a Latin for save yourself from hell. Are you familiar with this record at all?
Oh yeah, this is like a landmark record for Zayo and in my history.
Great.
And I'm saying like from a fan angle. It's great.
Tell me about your fan experience with Liberate, please.
Now, this record, I got into hardcore around 98. That was my entry point. Zayo was a very prominent band in the scene at the time. I was familiar with the first record, Splinter Shards, but I really loved Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest, as many did back then, and I was super into that album. I had seen the band and loved them. We had the Training for Utopia Zayo split where we got a taste of the new Zayo coming, and everyone was just chomping at the bit, waiting for Liberate to come out, and it was a very, very highly anticipated record, and it delivered. It was fantastic, and I loved everything about it. And I know some people made fun of the layout, I guess, because the band, I think someone was wearing eyeliner or whatever that was going on in the layout, but I liked everything about it. I loved it.
Yes. Similar experience to you. Had almost identical as a fan experience. And I worked on Splinter Shards with Dave Rankin, who painted the original cover to Splinter Shards. And then the band brought him back to paint the Where Blood and Fire album artwork with the guy on fire on the front cover, right? You're familiar?
Oh, yes.
So Dave Rankin is just a little commuter school teacher of high school students painting in his classroom every day in Philadelphia. Still to this day, that's what he does. And my mission was to find Dave to get those paintings essentially restored for the purposes of a vinyl reissue. So getting to know Dave and having him go in and restore some of this artwork. He also did Further Seems Forever, How to Start a Fire, among others, some really interesting titles that his visual aesthetic is so unique and his talent is enormous. And he's just sort of one of those hidden characters in the scene that we don't really talk about by name. We might recognize his iconography from his artwork that he's painted, but nobody's putting him in the Smithsonian of hardcore legends of painting, even though they should.
Yeah, that cover image for Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest should be in the Smithsonian. As far as I'm concerned, that's iconic.
So you have the third record, which sonically is almost like a darker, deeper, twisted cousin of Blood and Fire. Blood and Fire almost sounds like a pop record compared to Liberate, in my opinion. And when talking to the band about layouts, they had mentioned to me never loving how Liberate's artwork had turned out in the original release with Jesse's eye and the eyeliner. I think they had some things about it that they appreciated. The 7 Circles of Hell, for example,
Yeah, I thought that whole thing was really cool.
That part worked, but the cover itself was very unappealing to them. They didn't really get it. And it was too late and already at the presses by the time it had come out. So this is where the unoriginal vinyl story and the relationships and the fan experience starts to be really, really rewarding for me. And talking to Dave, I said, if there's a narrative here, and this is a trilogy of artwork visually, what's the narrative? And he goes, well, I would say that the first record is the birth, when you have this splintering essentially of a woman's anatomy to have a baby, and there's a little ghoulish baby kind of creature on the front. And then the second album is a death, where there's a guy who's basically at the very end of his life cycle immolating on the front cover. And then there's other examples of death. I said, so what if 20 years after the fact, that person finds a way to escape hell? What if he's been in hell for 20 years and that same character escapes from hell somehow? You know what I mean? The Paradise Lost story, if you were, and it's been in hell, and what does hell look like? And we start talking through some crazy ideas. And I come up with this narrative where essentially, the snake on the back of Where Blood and Fire, who is eating the man, that snake has been digesting the man slowly over 20 years. And then the person essentially gets free from its addiction, the hell that it's living in. And it's like a newfound angel, and it busts out of the snake. It unhinges the snake's jaws, and it releases itself and becomes free from hell and blasts a bunch of demons like Gandalf or whatever,
I love it. Wow. You get to create like a whole story around this. It sounds so cool.
So we released the record with the new artwork. And it's a mixed bag. There are people who are just wanting the nostalgia of seeing the original eyeball. And then there are people who, I think more often than not, including all of the members of the band, really love putting those three records next to each other on their wall, telling a story about those three records now, instead of it just being an album that came out in 1999 with weird eyeball artwork and a mascara person. Now it's relevant in 2022. There's this whole beautiful restored artwork, including a brand new painting for the first time working with Dave Rankin in almost 20 years. The band gets to go celebrate his work and see the time lapse of him painting the whole thing over a long period of time, like all of this stuff. You know what I mean? For me, that's more of what I mean by saying a label doesn't do that. You know what I mean?
No.
And an artist doesn't necessarily have the know-how to do that. So putting myself on the Z-axis and thinking about the end user, which is the fan, I would say, I want to own that thing. I want to see new Dave Rankin artwork associated with Zayo in the worst kind of way. What do I got to do to make that happen? You know what I mean?
Wow, that really tells the story of what you're doing very well. This example you've given here, I love that. So you're not like a middleman. You ever see the movie Michael Clayton?
I mean, it's been a minute.
With George Clooney?
Yeah, not since 2001, maybe?
He's just like the guy that gets things done, no matter what. He knows who to talk to. He just knows how to do it. That's like you.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably a fair assessment. There's another piece in that, though, where I think if you were to look at me or you looked at my LinkedIn or something like that, and because I don't have social media, I have other people running the social media for me, you would think there's no way in the world that guy is into getting in the pit hardcore. You know what I mean? And there's a subtlety to that I love, like Matt Damon's character in Ocean's 11, where he's playing the Nevada Gaming Commissioner. Like, he's got the clutch job of everybody in that movie, way more than anybody else. You know what I mean? And that whole idea of be specific but not memorable, be funny but don't make him laugh. He's got to like you and then forget you the moment you've left his side. That's the like coaching strategy that Brad Pitt gives him in it. That's my training. Like, I can just be in and out of people's consciousness for a very short amount of time and be like, I don't know what happened, but I kind of like that just happened. That was really fun. That was kind of unique. That's a unique dude over there. I like him, but who was he again? What's the story? You know what I mean? And I'm already on to the next thing, doing more creating with somebody else. So that's where I find a lot of joy. And I have to kind of find joy in that because I do it all over the country so often. I'm traveling a lot to do things like this with complete strangers, creating little like memories and moments for myself to tell my family or my daughter, or creating moments for them to be like, yo, the weirdest guy came in today. He could talk, but I don't know. I think it was cool. I think it was fun, you know?
That's excellent. So where do you live?
I'm in Denver, about South Denver in the suburbs. Yeah. So I grew up in
nice.
Colorado, but I also grew up down in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas.
I've been to Denver a couple times for work, in Denver or just outside. And the thing I always tell people is like, the sky is unlike anything I've ever seen out there. It just looks completely incredible.
Yeah. And you're in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is very different. I mean, I go running in the mornings and I can see 80 miles in all directions between two 14ers on the Front Range. I live at 6,000 feet elevation. So yeah, the air is thinner up here. And I think Colorado's vibe is very informal and very unpretentious. There's no pretension to people from Colorado at all. We're pretty laid back folk and have a lot of fun and have our own unique, quirky interests that to maybe the rest of the world of either the scene or social media or whatever would just seem to not fit in necessarily with that, what's really popular. But we're all very proud to just sort of wear our interests on our hat. You know what I mean? This is just who we are, what we like. And it's cool. I think it goes back to fiercely independent, gold mining, rugged sort of DNA that exists out here. These people all sort of come here for their own reasons and do their own thing.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time. That's it. So, Jason, I just want to say thanks. It was great hearing about Unoriginal Vinyl. And I mean, you have some great stories. It sounds like you're doing awesome work. Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you so much, Keith. Appreciate the time. And please continue to make these new scene episodes because you're doing the Lord's work here as well.
Hey, I'm not going anywhere. This is it. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the chat with Toby. We hope you enjoyed the chat with Jason. I'm back next week with a new episode and a new guest. So thanks everybody for listening. And until next time.